Conneaut City Council for January 10th, 2022 is now in session. Roll call, please.
Council President, Mr. Arcaro,
Present.
Mr. Emery,
Present.
Mr. Goff,
Here.
Mr. Kozowski,
Here.
Mrs. Lightford. Here. Mr. Moiseo,
Here.
Mr. Prokowski,
Present.
City Manager, Mr. Hockaday.
Here.
Finance Director, Mr. Williams.
Here.
Law Director, Mr. Lewis.
Here.
Okay, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the men and women who serve on Pontiac City Council. Thank you for their willingness to serve their community with their time and talents. We thank you for the administrators and employees of the city of Pontiac for their work in making our community a wonderful place to live and work. We come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and provision as council begins its first televised meeting of the new year. Help them to engage in meaningful discussion, allow them to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of community. Fill them with your grace, Lord God, as they make decisions that affect the residents, visitors, and employees of the great city of Conneaut. And continue to remind them that all that they do here this evening, all that they accomplish is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you, and for the service of others. We ask these things in your beloved and precious name. Amen.
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 Thank you, Deacon Nick. Okay, moving on to approval of the meeting minutes for December 20th, 2021. Are there any alterations or corrections? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion, Mr. Arcaro. I'll second.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Lightford,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Okay, the meeting minutes for December 20th, 2021 have been approved. Okay, we have a special presentation this evening. And with us in chambers is Judge Nick Irochi to swear in our new member, Oki Emery, who is unable to attend our organizational meeting. So Oki, if you'd like to come forward with your family.
Mhm.
Well, first off, I want to say that it's an honor for me to give the oath to Oki. We go back a long ways to our children, great being together at the same age, coaching the same teams, the CLYO together. And what a great honor it is for you and your family. So it's wonderful to do this. Raise your right hand, and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Oki Emery,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
the Constitution and laws of the state of Ohio,
the Constitution and laws of the state of Ohio,
and the charter and ordinances of the city of Conneaut, Ohio,
the charter and ordinance of the city of Conneaut, Ohio,
and will,
and will,
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
perform all of the duties
perform all of the duties
incumbent upon me
incumbent upon me
as third ward councilman
as third ward councilman
for the city of Conneaut.
for the city of Conneaut.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Who wants to make this official?
Thank you.
You all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to citizen comments. Does anybody have any citizen comments? They signed up there? Mr. Lewis,
Sorry?
anybody signed up?
No.
Okay. Does council have any citizen comments? Okay, communications.
I have none this evening.
Does council have any communications? Okay, hearing none, move on to reports of our administration, beginning with the city manager, Mr. Hockaday.
Thank you, Council President Arcaro. Just a couple quick updates. Did have our annual or our Asheville County Convention Visitors Bureau meeting this past Wednesday. Some updates on the lodge. The county commissioners did pass an extension co-signed with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to give them another couple of months to continue to negotiate on the lodge. I did send out a press release that was sent out by the County Convention Visitors Bureau that I think you should all take a look at. It's in your email. It's a revision of and a review of the financial impact and financial statements of the county and the profitability of the lodge. So I would like you all to take a look at that if you so desire, but I just wanted to keep you updated on that issue, as I know it's of countywide interest. I had a brief conversation with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers regarding dredge and some timing for the upcoming contracts for some dredge work and operations in the federal nav channel. As those conversations proceed and we're able to flesh those out, I'll share those with council. It looks as though at this time, we've pretty much concluded negotiations with USW, waiting on their vote to authorize. The FOP, I believe, is done. The FOP civilian, I'm waiting on one item for response from them. That's a unit of only 2 collective bargaining members. So hopefully I'll have something back. And then AFSCME's got a couple things that they're going to tie up this week. It's my goal to have any of the tentative agreements on those collective bargaining units to council by the 17th, so we could review those at the work session on the 17th. And that would be for authorization then on the 24th of January. They are, of course, retroactive back to the first of the year. So as we get all of our tentative agreements in, the only one that I don't have anything on is IAFF. And we are waiting on their response. So the ball's kind of in their court. So I don't have a tentative timeline for them. So hopefully we'll see that at the forthcoming meeting here on the 17th, and we'll go over each of those accordingly. I'm also anticipating having the Buffalo Street sewer boring project. This is the replacement of the sanitary sewer line on Buffalo Street under the NS tracks. Need to be Gerald bored and replaced here this coming spring. So we're hoping to have an authorization to bid for you ready for that January 24th meeting, so we can get that project out the door. And the same is true with the Route 20 sewer line lining project. We're hoping to have that out for you as well, and that is a capital project item. When we get to the ordinance section of the agenda, the NS Railroad Bridge Replacement Project, we'll go over that in some detail. And then finally, the kayak launch ramp was completed. We did get the final pay orders and pay applications. Those were signed and authorized, and those will clear out this month, and that project will be officially closed. We worked out an agreement with the Port Authority. The wooden ramp itself is removable. Since it's kind of closely tied to their client, the Conneaut Float and Fly. The Port Authority guys have agreed to set it in the spring and then remove it and store it in the winter for us. So they actually removed it today. So if you drive by and it looks like it's not there, it's because it's a removable ramp and it is not there. It's been stored for winter. Okay. So it's kind of a nifty little design. And it being early in the year, those are all the updates I have for you. I did attach our Conneaut Fire Department response. There are some things that are totalized annually. One that we've talked about consistently on the second page there is drug overdoses and suspected drug deaths. So you can look at kind of that information. I mean, year over year, if we compared that to 2020 and 2019, there's probably a slight decrease in that, even though one I don't think is acceptable. It has decreased a little bit. I think it's probably more a reflection of the pandemic than a reflection of drug activity. So while it's good, it's probably on the downtrend. I wouldn't put too much stock in that. I think if things open back up, those numbers will go back up as well. And then you can look at their 2021 stats. We will get a full end of year report for you guys so you can see the last couple of years. Obviously, I'd look at 2018 and 2019 as normal years, and 2020 and 21 are kind of COVID affected years in terms of any of those run and call logs. So fairly significant numbers. EMS numbers, I believe, are up slightly, which is anticipated. So as far as COVID numbers, I did not get them in time today to include them in my report. I did get them from Michelle just a couple moments before the meeting, but we have 93 active cases, down from last week from 122. Hospitalizations are up from 3 to 8. Current deaths, there were 2 COVID deaths from Conneaut this last week. There might be a third, but they weren't at our hospital, so we're trying to confirm that one. And a total deaths since the tracking period on November it's annual is 42. The 2021, but that does include on the 3rd, and then obviously this week the 10th. So those
How
are
many,
those
I'm sorry, excuse me. How many deaths did you say there were?
42.
I mean, just recent, like the last.
2 in this
week?
past week.
2, okay.
There may be a third, but we're trying to confirm
Okay.
that they did not die at our hospital. We're trying to establish their residency and where that vital statistic goes. Obviously, I don't think I have to tell you it's bad. The Army reserves are in town, the National Guard, assisting UH Conneaut and UH Geneva, a lot of staff support, non-medical roles, obviously, a lot of the housekeeping, food service, where they're struggling with workforce as well. I would just tell you generally, we've tried to do our best with ongoing changes with the CDC guidelines in terms of what's required and when. So you all know, we've retained our negative test return to work policy. I think that's our most prudent choice, since we have fairly small and lean departments. So we have mass widespread cases in any one department, we're going to lose service capability in those departments. So our goal is to make sure that we can provide services across all departments at all times. So trying to make sure that everybody's as safe as possible. We just can't have everybody get sick at once. So that's really important to us, and we've struggled with it. I know probably over the last couple of weeks, we've averaged at least 3 to 5 employees absent due to COVID or quarantine related to COVID. So it continues to be an ongoing challenge for management as well as operations. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Hockley, I have one. Do you have a status update, or if you could check into the status of the guardrail being repaired on Lake Erie Street now that it's winter?
So here's where we're at. We're going to reutilize the guardrail that came off Route 20 for that project, to be able to put up guardrail on both sides of that street. However, when the contractor removed it, they cut it on each side of the post, eliminating the bolt patterns on them. So we're either going to have to order new guardrail or retap and reconstruct each of those guardrail segments. At this point, Joe from Public Works received them just before Christmas, I think. I think the week before Christmas, but the contractor, when they did the removal, instead of just unbolting them and taking them apart and neatly stacking them, they used a chop saw and cut off the bolt pad on each side. So we're kind of back to the drawing board. I know he was working on seeing how easy it would be to tap and just reutilize the guardrail segments by punching new holes and new blocking, or whether it was going to be more cost effective to do something else. So we'll have to get back to you on that one, but we were hoping to just be able to plug and play and take it from one side and move it over to the other side, but that's not the case.
All right, thanks. Any other questions for the city manager? Okay, if not. Finance Director, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Arcaro. We are not yet closed for the 2021 year. I hope to close this week. We should be up and running by Friday. Soon after that, I should have budgetary and bank reports for council, but it's probably going to be early next week. I'll email them to you as I always do. We did receive notice from the county with a change in our tax valuation, our real estate tax valuation. We'll be using this tax valuation for our tax budget estimates in July. I tried to give you a summary. Last year, we had the total revaluation of the city, which increased our assessed value by about 14 million. Our total assessed valuation was around 200.6 million. Market valuation was about 573 million. We did see a modest increase this year of 1.17% or 2.3 million in assessed value. Our market valuation is now 580 million. The next set of numbers, I tried to break it down by property class for the valuation so you can see the differences there. The largest increase that we saw dollar-wise was in the commercial industrial real estate, but that represents roughly about 1/3, not quite 1/3, about 30% of our total valuation. And then the largest percentage increase was in public utility personal property. So you can see the breakdown of that 2.3 million by property class. Next set of numbers are all the funds that have millage associated with them. As I always say every year, I mean, the inside millage, there are no reduction factors for inside millage. So whatever we collect there, the only thing that you're going to see subject to any type of decrease is the estimated delinquencies. We're estimating them at 5%. Normally the collections come in higher than the 5% delinquency, but that's what we're estimating. So we have 4 outside levies. There are reduction factors associated with those. For 3 of them, the weighted average reduction factor is about 5.4%. The police levy at 2 is about 9.5. That's because it's an older levy, it was passed years ago, so it has a higher reduction factor. So the net reduction on, well, the gross estimated revenue for all the levies and inside is about 2.9 million. Net reduction about 136. That leaves a net estimated revenue of 2.78 million. Net of the 5% delinquencies, it's about 2.644 million. The full millage, as I said, was 14.38, but the effective is about 13.7. And then I did the effective for each of the levies. And then if you want to look at each of the levies individually, it's the next group of numbers. You can see the reduction factors, not the weighted average, but the reduction by property class. So for instance, the fire levy has a 7.7 reduction factor, but that's only for the residential. And that represents about 2/3 of the evaluation. And then about 1.4 for combined industrial and public utility. So for the levies, I mean, the police levies, the 2 and the 3 combined are about 894,000. Street levy, we're estimating probably about 501,000 in collections. And then the fire levy, the new fire levy, the 3 is about 546,000. Just to note on that, it seems like a lot of money for the fire department and the police department, but it only represents part of their funding. Most of their funding still comes from the general fund. And the fire department, even with that new 3 mil levy, we added 3 new firefighters. All the costs associated with that, they have a balance right now of about 57,000 at the end of the year out of that 540,000. So I just wanted to update you on that. Like I said, once I get done with closing the year, I will have reports to you as soon as possible. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for the finance director? Okay, thank you. Going to the law director, Mr. Lewis.
Nothing to report at this time, Mr. President. Take any questions or if anybody has any.
Any questions for the law? Okay, thank you. Move on to reports of our committees. Okay, hearing none. Liaison reports. Hearing none there either. Move on to our ordinances for this evening. And we have 4 ordinances on the table, 96 through 99, which will stay on the table until we hear from the Planning Commission. We have 2 ordinances in second reading, and we will begin with ordinance 11021.
An ordinance authorizes the city manager to enter into a real estate donation agreement with the Conneaut Port Authority for the purpose of donating a 1.45 acre parcel of land more commonly known as Dean Avenue Park and declaring an emergency.
Any update on that, Mr. Hockaday?
No update on that. I think we can move it to a third reading. If we were discussing having a public meeting about either or both of these donations, then we might pick a date that's copacetic for everybody before we do the final reading.
Okay. Mr. Moiseo.
I thought we were gonna have Mr. Peterson come, but I believe on that day is a holiday.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that.
Okay, okay.
He is going to attend our next meeting on the 18th.
On the 18th, okay, okay. I'll make a motion to move 110-21 to third reading.
Okay, ordinance 11021 has been moved to a third reading. Move on to ordinance 11121.
An ordinance authorizes the city manager to enter into a real estate donation agreement with the Ashtabula County Metro Parks Board for the purpose of donating 43.96 acres of land known as Malik Park and declaring an emergency.
Okay, any update on that, Mr. Hockaday?
All the same comments.
Okay. Mr. Kozowski.
Mr. Harker, I'd like to move ordinance 111-21 to a third reading.
Okay, ordinance 11121 has been moved to a third reading. Move on to our first reading ordinances for this evening. And we have one in first reading to consider, which is 0122.
An ordinance to authorize the city manager to execute an access agreement between the city of Conneaut, Norfolk Southern Corporation, and Mascaro Construction Company for the purpose of permitting reconstruction of the Norfolk and Southern Railroad Bridge and declaring an emergency.
Hey, Mr. Hockaday.
Want to share a couple of the exhibits with this. If my I have to share exhibits. Oh, wrong one. So just so everybody's aware of the area that we're talking about here. This is the extent of the bridge. From my recollection, it's about a 1,500-foot span that goes across the Gulf east-west along Conneaut Creek. And that's the Norfolk Southern Rail Line. They have a plan of attack that is going to involve them coming in and putting in a driveway apron here, constructing a temporary road through this river bottom, which is owned by Canadian National. The access off of Old Main is obviously not rated for trucks. It's obviously a residential street. And they're asking to use it as their primary construction entrance for the purposes of this project. And they will proceed down here. They're going to put cofferdams and then bore new footings into the bottom of Conneaut Creek. They will then pour their vertical columns underneath the existing bridge. All of that will be done this year. Next year, they're going to remove portions of the bridge and replace it on an in-kind basis. So they're not going to take the bridge out of service. It'll be temporarily out of service during the workday and then reopened for traffic at night, each and every night. So this is going to be a 2-year-long project beginning this year and extending all the way through the season next year. The majority of the above the water line and rail work will occur in 23 rather than 22. They did attach a timeline. We've had numerous discussions about this. They've gone through their permitting process. They were approved for their permitting to bore new footings into the Conneaut Creek. Once they remove the old stone columns, it will actually be a reduced impact on the floodway and the drainage way of Conneaut Creek because it's much smaller in size than the old hand-laid stone. They will be doing some access and light truck access on this bank. That is directly along the BNLE line there. And then they'll also have some shoulder access on either side. They're hoping to get started here in the winter while things have frozen to get in there and do some clearing and grubbing if all possible. And then they're going to be pouring in a concrete apron. So when they're turning off the street into the temporary access drive, they're not tearing up the street. You've all had the agreements. They've agreed to do certain things for the city in exchange for this. The two big ones that I would identify is a couple of them is they're going to notify residents. They have a notice to residents. We're going to assist them with that. And we've offered a public meeting space at their convenience when they go to commence this project in earnest beyond the preparatory stuff. They've provided a emergency contact and contact list to the city, which I've shared with you all. That has also been given to police, fire and dispatch for emergency contacts. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through the duration of the project. They've also agreed at the conclusion of the project, since the primary construction interest for a lot of the weighted material that'll go down below is going to come in 20 and turn down Old Main and then obviously into their temporary drive. We anticipate there to be some deconstruction of our road. As they do that, they're going to be moving in thousands of tons of material here. And at the conclusion of the project, they will resurface from the bridge to Route 20 in exchange for use of the road. And then obviously during large segments of this project, they're going to have to close the river traffic that will be underneath the bridge itself, just out of safety consideration. It would be at our urging that they also do that, because even if you lose a small stone from up on top of that track and it falls into the water below and you're kayaking, it would be bad for everybody involved. So a lot of times it will be safer for them to simply close river traffic underneath them. Obviously, that's going to have some potentially large impacts, business impacts for the Conneaut Float and Fly and some other small businesses. So what they've agreed to do and actually have already done is they deposited a $45,000 check for business impact. I've discussed this at some lengths with the Conneaut Port Authority to provide Conneaut Float and Fly with a waterfront option as well as a Woodworth Road option, which would allow kayakers, when they do the trips, to launch at Woodworth and go to the pull out of the waterfront, or simply embark and disembark from the waterfront option. And there would be some additional funding in there to dress up the Woodworth ramp, hopefully to make it a little safer. It needs some concrete work done on it. But this would allow us to maintain river traffic as normal without necessarily requiring the city or taxpayers to have to pay that burden of making those enhancements to accommodate river traffic. All in all, Mascaro, the construction company that's been awarded this project by NNS, I've found them to be highly responsive. They've been easy and clear to deal with. They've been very helpful. They provided all the documents that we've requested of them and have generally been good and responsive communicators throughout the entire negotiation spot. I know they're eager to get underway. I want to see if I can see well enough to pull up this timeline. That's not it. Maybe this one. That's also not it. Let me see. It's always easier to do this when everybody's not watching. So. So here's their construction timetable that they've provided us with. And you can see that there's a lot of clearance pieces, but the earnest construction, the heavy structural steel deliveries and all those kinds of things are going to happen really in 2023. So we're going to see some activity down there this year, but it's not going to be the level of activity that we're going to see in 2023. Obviously, there's going to be some enhanced truck and driving traffic on Old Main and Route 20 East headed towards Pennsylvania, where the majority of their materials are going to come from. So they have also placed a work schedule here. I think they're trying to be pretty accommodating on some of these. I understand, they have a right to work on their railroad. I think they're trying to be as generous as possible while also have nice long work spans in terms of being able to take segments of the bridge out and replace them and restore it to traffic grade at the end of every day. So they are probably a little bit long on some of the start days, but 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. But I think they've tried to accommodate the noise and some of the burden on immediate residents to the best of their ability. It is a railroad. It's an active railway line. It does make quite a bit of noise currently. Obviously this will be a little bit different kind of noise, but construction noise. But at the same time, I think they've been forthcoming with a reasonable schedule. And if this doesn't work or there are issues with the existing proposal, I think we have the opportunity to talk back and say, hey, let's try and make reasonable accommodations for some of the residents in the area. And as I said, they have agreed to the public notices and holding a public meeting to address any concerns specific to those residents. It's hard for the city or city council to be a conduit a lot of times when we're not as familiar with the project as the contractor is. And so far, they've been very forthcoming. I know they've met with a couple of the folks in the area already that live immediately adjacent. They've been doing a lot of survey work and other kind of preparatory work. So I know they've bumped into a few of them and kind of told them what's going on. So at this juncture, I don't have any concerns. I think they've acted in good faith the entire time, and they're ready to proceed on some of the clearance activities. I'm happy to answer any questions I'm able to. Chris Novka, I was kind of hoping he was going to be able to be here tonight and join us by Zoom. He wasn't quite sure, so and he's with Mascaro, so apparently he wasn't able to make it. I was hoping he was going to be here.
My only question is, when they come to build the head walls, that's each end, that we have protection, nickel plate, north lane, and wood. That's, to make sure the road's not tore up. That's my only concern.
They did not ask for street access from these public streets, nor have they asked for street access off of Woodworth. The only place they asked for street access is here and here. And we've noted that this bridge is not of the capacity to take any kind of construction vehicle. Obviously, it's a pickup truck or observation vehicle, it can go back and forth across the bridge, but semi trucks and other things, that bridge is not load rated for that kind of activity. They're aware of that. It will be signed in both directions, say, hey, you can't drive your semi truck across this, or it's going to be a bad deal for everybody. Like I said, they have a nice little construction plan. I'm pretty happy with it, but the primary roadway impact is going to be Old Main, and it's going to be here. Particularly where they're making that turn, the scrubbing activity of those tires on loaded trucks is going to be detrimental to the roadbed. And they are going to pour concrete aprons, adjacent to the road to limit how much it tears up the shoulder. But I think it's a somewhat inevitable, which is why they agreed to resurface the road.
And they'll be using East Main for the equipment.
Yeah.
Routing to the city, correct?
Yes, so there's pre-stressed concrete columns as well as pre-constructed steel columns. Some of that will be staged over at NS and will move in by rail on a construction train. And some of it will be trucked in. The only caveat I'll lay in there is once they have the final weight on some of those things, some of the bridges in Pennsylvania are not as strong as the bridges in the state of Ohio. And so we might have to play around with that if it becomes a permitting issue. I don't think it's going to be an issue, but the goal is to route everything in from Pennsylvania so they can make that gradual turn down Old Main, because these are not only over weight, but they are over length. So turning radius is a real factor. So we'll get there once we have the final determined lengths of some of these units and final weights, and they can get their permits from the Ohio Highway Patrol.
Were they going to stage the other equipment on NNS property? Or?
Yes, largely they're going to use the NNS yard over there. They cleared an area already to store a lot of their operations equipment.
There's not going to be much stored in the construction area.
I don't believe so. I mean, I know when they move the cranes and other items in here, they're going to be in the river bottom.
Right.
But there won't be anything. They'll basically operate during the summertime, spring clearance activities and all that kind of stuff. They're going to construct their temporary roads this summer. They will pull all their equipment out for the winter. Obviously, the risk of flooding and flooding hazard during the fall, spring, and winter time is pretty high. So they have a very short construction window of when they can operate because of the river height.
It's my understanding that this isn't their first go around this company. They did a similar project with Painesville. So they have experience. Okay, any other comments or questions regarding this ordinance? If not, is there a motion to proceed?
Mr. Carroll, I'd make a motion to waive the 24-hour rule on ordinance number 01-22.
There's a motion to suspend a 24-hour rule on ordinance 01-22. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Lightford,
yes,
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Moiseo, the 24-hour rule has been suspended.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance number 01-22.
So motion to suspend a 3 reading rule on ordinance 01-22. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Lightford,
yes,
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Moiseo, the 3 reading rule has been suspended.
I'd like to declare ordinance 01-22 an emergency.
Motion to declare ordinance 01-22 an emergency. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Lightford,
yes,
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Moiseo, the emergency's been declared.
I'd like to make a motion to act on ordinance 01-22.
Motion to act on ordinance 01-22. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Lightford,
yes,
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 01-22 is passed. That concludes our ordinances for this evening. Starting off slow. Move on to unfinished and old business. Okay, hearing none, move on to miscellaneous business. And I have one thing under miscellaneous business. Didn't realize when we planned the work session for next Monday. It's a holiday, so that is actually gonna have to be the 18th. And you anticipate a lot of activity at that work session?
If we have the collective bargaining agreements from the 4 units, we'll cover that. And then any of the construction projects that are ready to go.
Well, we'll just keep it at 5:30 then.
5:30. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else for miscellaneous business?
I have one thing. I would just like to reiterate that the joint meeting with the Board of Education and Council that was scheduled for Wednesday, January 12th is canceled. And I'll let you know when the new meeting is scheduled.
And Mr. Arco,
Yes.
I have something here. I'd like to recognize and thank Maureen Tanner for continuing the Conneaut Blue Strong campaign, recognizing the Conneaut Police Department and law enforcement. Mo and her husband Jim started this many, many years ago. And sadly, Jim passed away this past November.
I'm not sure I understand.
She wanted to continue it. However, she wasn't able to do so. And Chief Colby and Officers Burlingham and Pinkett stepped in and helped set things up and help her get it all organized. And I'd like to thank them also. And particularly this year, this is especially important in light of the officer that was murdered last week or 2 weeks ago in Cleveland. So this is a very good campaign and everybody's encouraged to light a blue light, either a porch light or somewhere on their house in a window or something like that. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else for miscellaneous business? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
I will second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Lightford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Pontiac City Council for January 10th, 2022 is adjourned. Thank you.